tradition, beginning by attending churches in Kerrisdale and studying zoology at UBC, and then continuing with studying theology in Saskatoon. His first parish was in southwestern Ontario. He came to Squamish in 1995, where he was the rector while starting a family. He continued as rector in Dunbar from 2001. During this time, John was appointed to be an archdeacon of the diocese and served on numerous committees and task forces. He is now Bishop of the new Westminster Diocese. Please join me in welcoming Bishop John. What is the role of an Anglican bishop today? What is the role of an Anglican bishop today? Bishop John.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew. I really appreciate the introduction, and it's great to be with all of you. Happy New Year. It sounds like this is the first meeting of the year for you, so Happy New Year. In the summer of 2022, approximately 600 bishops from the Anglican Church throughout the world gathered in Canterbury, England, for what is known as the Lambeth Conference. So every 10 years, unless a pandemic gets in the way, all of the bishops of the Anglican Communion, as we call it, meet for about 10 days to discuss theology, to study the Bible, to pray, to hear of concerns, to plan for the future, and a few other things. We met with people we have never met before to compare our local situation with those of other countries and other continents. And so African bishops are speaking to Maori bishops from New Zealand. Inuit bishops were speaking to Solomon Island bishops. The Bishop of Jerusalem was speaking to the Archbishop of Canterbury. It was truly fascinating and indeed eye-opening. And so in July of 2022, we met for some of the time in the ancient Canterbury Cathedral and talked about things like Anglican identity, the environment, evangelism, discipleship, science and faith, and a few other things besides. We prayed together, we sang music from all over the globe, we ate together and discussed the role of a bishop in this fast-paced world that, in our context anyway, wonders about the place of faith and spirituality and religion. Anglican bishops wear a lot of purple, and so at one point in the conference, there were about 150 of us purple-clad bishops traveling on the Thames River on a Uber boat, which was really quite a sight. So back to the role of a bishop. The role of a bishop is found in the Bible in 2 Timothy, where we hear these words. Now, a bishop must be above reproach, married only once, temperate, sensible, respectable, hospitable, an apt teacher, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, but not a lover of money. It offers a few more words, but maybe you get the point. Huge expectations for the role. It is also understood that we follow an apostolic succession. For we believe, and we can follow this back fairly easily, that St. Peter was considered the first bishop, if you will, and he in turn laid hands on the next bishops, and ever since we have laid hands on the next bishops, linking us back to the first. This is both beautiful and worrisome. We have much to live into, and I guess that's really the point. We are in the role of an overseer, symbolized with the use of a shepherd's crook as a sign of our office. We are meant to be a pastor, a teacher, an overseer, a protector, a guide, a leader. Now, when I was made a bishop at my ordination, usually it's a grand event with many dignitaries, church leaders, magnificent music, hundreds of people, and of course, lots of ceremony for us Anglicans. But for me, it was in 2021, and we were in the midst of the pandemic. 10 people were allowed into the cathedral for the event. Much was done in front of a camera to bring others in to join the celebration. But even there, it was mandatory that we had 3 bishops present to lay their hands upon me as part of the ordination rite. In the essentially empty cathedral, the 3 bishops were witnesses and participants in the apostolic succession from the first disciples of Jesus to the current disciples of Jesus. At that service, I became more acquainted with the symbols of what a bishop wears or holds as associated with the office. Along with the crozier or the shepherd's crook, there are a few other things related to the role. Anglican bishops, as I said, wear the color purple, which is linked to their role as an overseer, but also as a sign of repentance. A bishop needs to hold this as important in their own life and the lives of others they encounter. This color purple is seen in the shirts we wear and the ring that is worn on our right hand. A bishop will also wear a few different vestments during worship, which are linked to their position in the church. They will wear a purple cassock under a rochet or a white gown and a shamir or a red cloak, which are only worn by a bishop and are linked to them being bound to their diocese and to their role. They will often wear a beautifully decorated cope, which is like a cape, that again is linked to their position as the head of the diocese. The cope usually matches the mitre or the hat that a bishop wears. The mitre is in the shape of a flame linked to the Holy Spirit descending upon the bishop at the time of their ordination. Every bishop in the Anglican Church will have a cathedral, which is essentially the central church of the diocese. It is the church where the bishop has a special seat or chair known as a cathedra, hence the name of cathedral, which is symbolic of the seat or the placement of the bishop. From that cathedra, linked to the previous bishops of the diocese, the bishop will ordain and confirm and preside for special services of the church. It is an important tradition linking the past with the present, linking what has been done for centuries with the current day technology and communications. Now, the title of this talk is Connecting to Tradition. So now you have a quick sense of a history of the role of a bishop. But if it is all simply about tradition from many years ago, does it have a lot of relevance for today? I was made a bishop, as I said, in 2021 in the pandemic. And the way the service was held is quite symbolic of what is taking place in the world of now. With my ancient vestments or robes, which also link back to the robes that would have been worn at the time of Jesus, how does that link with the world of today? The church has a very different role now than it did 50 years ago, or 100 years ago, or 1,000 years ago. While God has remained steadfast and consistent, we have changed and evolved. Church attendance in North America and Europe and some parts of the Southern Hemisphere is shrinking. Many people are not sure how to tie together faith in God and faith in science. Are they compatible? Many are not sure that we need churches in our communities, unsure of their purpose or significance. Churches are closing with some regularity across the country. Are we relevant anymore? What is the role of the bishop in all of this? Is it my role to simply shut out the lights and lock the doors? Well, absolutely not. In my sense is that while many people are not sure about organized religion, there is no doubt that people continue to seek out spirituality and its place in our lives. A vast majority of people continue to have a belief in God, but are not sure how that translates into how they understand the church of today and spiritual well-being. Many search for meaning and hope and light in so much darkness. How do we understand God's presence in the world of now? Well, there are a number of ways to answer that, and I am open to many of them. For me personally, as was mentioned, I have an undergraduate degree in science. And so a coming together of modern day science, along with a belief and hope in God, is important for me. I think that science can point to the presence of God. I also think that science can help us understand more about the created order, the universe, the beauty, the wonder. There are, of course, many advances in science and medicine and psychology and physics and geology and mathematics and biology and ecology and astronomy and technology, to which, of course, we need to pay much attention. The separation of scientific study and thought from theology and spiritual perspective has harmed the human race. We've allowed greed and disregard for certain people and power and violence and many other things to step in instead of hope and peace and connection with the earth and connection with other human beings. Jesus, reflecting the words of the Hebrew Bible, implored us to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. And this needs to influence how we walk in this world and how we interact with one another. It is not only important, but it is essential. Our understanding of God, the Bible, faith in a world of technology is always changing. It always has throughout all of history. People of faith have always had a variety of opinions ever since the beginning of the church. In Jesus' time, there was not complete consensus, and I don't believe that was ever actually the intention. In Judaism, at the time of Jesus, there were a number of different factions: Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and to some extent, the Samaritans, amongst others. Jesus did not work to eliminate the different groups, but really asked that the different groups work together to spread the good news of God's love. I believe that my calling as a bishop in the world of this time is to offer a voice that recognizes God's presence amongst us even now. I believe that our faith and trust in God is meant to influence us and how we treat other people. I believe that human beings are spiritual beings with an innate need to connect with what I would call the other beyond the narrow definitions of this world. My role as a bishop is to seek a path forward, respecting the tradition of the church, wearing my mitre and carrying my crozier as a sign of hope and openness, not simply maintaining ancient traditions. How does the world of today intersect with a world of our faith? This is important for all people to discover. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Bishop John. So yes, you gave us so much in perspective of the tradition moving forward into a world that can lose sight of some of those basic things that many of us have grown up with. We put the slant on tradition for this theme, and I think you answered a lot of my questions.
Okay.
The world is changing, and it sounds like the Anglican Church, or you in particular, can you tell us a little more about how the church is adapting to some of the newer concepts? You mentioned technology.
That's great. Yeah. So sure. So technology is certainly, I guess I would say, in the pandemic in particular, as you know, kind of like as we're doing tonight with the use of something like Zoom, but also sort of live streaming and that. So how it raises the question for us: how do we connect with people essentially outside of church and church buildings in ways that may be well received by folks? And I would say that for us in the pandemic, we really did note that a lot of people connected to either their local church or a church, in a different part of the world, because of course we were able to do that with live stream and able to watch a service, say, from Westminster Abbey or cathedral in Toronto or our cathedral downtown Vancouver or wherever. And I think there's something really important about that. There was a way that we could suddenly participate in something, even if we were just curious, because I know there were many people who probably would not darken the door of a church, or think they might not anyway. And yet they were able to do that. So I would say that's one thing in terms of technology. I would say there's lots of things on the minds of Christians in general, and I'll just sort of obviously focus on Anglicans. The environment is another huge issue for us that of great concern, and I know this goes across the board or for many folks in the world of today. But for us, I suppose from a faith perspective is really important. We believe that our understanding as people made in the image of God, that we are called to care for the world as best as we can. That's part of how we would understand. I would say loving God and loving our neighbors as ourselves is wrapped up into that. So that's another piece, and I'll just quickly add another thing, and there are many, but reconciliation is very much on our hearts at the moment, of course, as well, with Indigenous people in this country, and I would say even paying attention to that around the world too. And there are a number of places starting to wake up to some attitudes that essentially that do need to change. And in particular, paying attention to the people who lived here and have lived here for thousands and thousands of years, well before many of us. I appreciate that maybe not all of us gathered here, but for many of us, and the wisdom that can be shared with us, and just more learning through relationship that we might have with Indigenous folk, and obviously in particular in this country. So. Just a few things, just to name. I don't know if that's probably saying too much more,
no,
than you wanted me to say. But.
It really does resonate. And I know locally there have been some projects and emphasis on these issues. So right. I'm really excited about that as well. Sure. I heard you use leadership in terms of your role, of course.
Right.
And I was saying, you also mentioned that you walk the path to shine light on hope, and that connects with that last question.
Yeah.
What are some other values that you want to have the Anglican Church reflect these days?
Yeah, that's great. So certainly hope is really important, and so as I said, I'm living it out of that perspective of loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves. And so hope again is wrapped up into that. Where can the Anglican Church be part of bringing that, and how we care for other people? So huge concern. I mean, there are of course so many concerns these days, and but another one, of course, is homelessness, and how we care for those who are either homeless or just very precarious housing. And we're noticing, of course, more and more use of food banks and other sort of sources of food for folks who are just finding that it's just too difficult in the world of now. So there are many churches and other faith groups too, of course, but many churches offer a form of hospitality around food. And so, as I said, I would just categorize it as how do we care for other people? How do we love our neighbor as ourselves? And take that seriously. The world is a really difficult place in so many ways, and it feels a lot of people are feeling kind of the pressure of that with of course war in essentially the Middle East and Ukraine and of course other places too. But also poverty in places in the world, and the number of refugees in the world. So again, where does our faith in a God of love, as we believe that, how does that transform us and change us to see the world differently? So hope is definitely wrapped up in that, but I would just probably express it as love of God and love of neighbors as ourselves.
Thank you. When you described this, you actually said the Anglican Church does have a lot of ceremony. Is that quite unique to the Anglican Church?
Well, it's fairly. There are a few churches that do, but yes. we tend to love our ceremony. Yeah.
Do you find just for your members that does provide some stability and some connection
Yeah, that's a great question, because so some churches or other faith groups, just style of worship can range, a fair bit. So for us, there is that sort of, I guess I would say, sometimes sort of a formality to that, a sense of ceremony is sort of an easy descriptor. We described it as liturgical, so that's just the word that we would use, but that's referring to that, and just just in the sense that our worship has a certain pattern. And so for us as Anglicans, essentially, we can go to any church, any Anglican church in the world, basically walk in. It doesn't matter what language the service is in, and we would really kind of know what's going on, because there's a familiar pattern throughout the world. There's always, like everything, there's pluses and minuses to that, because we can kind of get a bit sort of stuck in this is how we do. How we do things. But I think, again, for us, for the most part, that's really important in that sort of shape of liturgy, how we do things. What we wear is often part of that, and just all of that sort of, call it, style of worship is really important to us. So I would fairly ceremonial, I would say. So we like a procession. We like to have a certain sort of way that things are done.
Yes. And you described it so beautifully. In Toastmasters, we pick up on the details and the descriptions, and you were wonderfully.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. And so the sense of leadership, we understand your role better now, and communication, how you're reaching out and using technology. We really feel that you've explained, your purpose and just the past bringing us to the present moment, and it really sounds like it's forward moving in my mind.
Thank you so much.
And now I'd like to open it up for Q&A to the rest of the group.
Absolutely.
So I don't know what our screen will look like, but thank you so much.
Oh, of course, and feel free to ask anything. Is fine. You don't need to hold back or whatever. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Natalie.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your speech, Bishop John. And I really enjoyed learning a little bit more about the Anglican Church and your traditions. And you talked a lot about the importance of traditions and how it's how it's linked through time.
Right.
And I was wondering, sort of the flip side, what in the traditions can make it hard in this day and age to adhere to them. And if there's any ones that, you really kind of feel maybe could be altered or dropped completely in this time.
That's great. That's a great question. It's hard to come up with something really quick, but it's really good, because let me begin by saying, I would say there's a lot of conversation around that in the churches to, the balance between what makes us Anglican is important. So as in sort of holding on to who we are. What makes us Christian is obviously a part of that as well. And of course, holding on to that. But what are the pieces that are kind of necessary within that? And what's the breadth of that? And so I would say in the Anglican Church, there is a fair bit of breadth, where some churches would look, again, I don't want to get, throw too many sort of either technical things or descriptors that add confusion. But so something more like, say, a Baptist church, which tends not to emphasize as much ceremony. So there can be Anglican churches that would look, a bit more like that, and then some that would look very much like a Roman Catholic church. So, and probably everything kind of in between. And that sort of reflects our history and all of that. And I think that breadth is really important to us because because of the sense that it's important that we can respect different opinions and a variety of opinions around all sorts of different topics. So I named a few things, things like climate emergency, reconciliation, reaching out to homeless, et cetera, a number of different things. And so, within the Anglican Church, there's not complete agreement on all things. And just because, say, a bishop says one thing doesn't mean that everybody suddenly agrees with it. So I think, and I think that's really important for us actually as Anglicans, that we have that breadth of opinion and thought, and room for that, and yet still either, just sort of sense of respecting one another or hearing one another, and realizing that we actually don't have to agree on every single thing, but still we can find a way forward. So coming back to that, I think that's where we push up against that. I think what you were asking was, are there things, sort of that we can let go? And I think that's important in our conversations. So there are some things that potentially for some is really difficult. So I'll go back a little bit to, there was a time where divorce in the church was really difficult for people to see as part of the Christian church. We live in a world where that's very, very different now. And it's caused us to ask the question, well, what does it mean to live into a marriage? And where, if two people are loving one another is one thing, but what if that falls apart? What do we do? And I think it's sort of that respectful sense of how do we pay attention to what we learn about the world around us, and how do we understand that in our Christian tradition and our Anglican tradition. And so we tend to take a little bit of time with things in the Anglican Church. We tend to be slow about change. Part of that, because of what I'm describing, is that we want to hear a variety of voices, and I think that's important for us. So I'm not sure if that helps a wee bit, but I think I really appreciate the breadth of what the Anglican Church can offer. I certainly don't think we're perfect in every way, that's for sure. But I think that's a really important piece of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed hearing the description of the cathedra, the seat. That's why a bishop needs a cathedral, because you have the seat, the cathedra, and for the purposes of the succession, the apostolic succession, because it's a sort of a symbol of that role in the institution. It's how you establish, the authority, and something that has existed for a couple thousand years has a lot of weight and substance in our culture, where everything is changing very, very rapidly. Sure. The appeal of the cathedral, the ceremony, the rituals, is something that there's beauty in that, and the music, and a sense of soothing and a solace to that, which even for someone who's not a churchgoer like myself, but even to know that it's there, to walk by a beautiful church, even to, sometimes see things on YouTube, or even to have a sense of that, or listen to the music, it's a peaceful thing for my soul. And I don't know how that fits in with, like wanting to support or say, enjoy that without actually, but I watch it so often on so many. Yeah,
well, that's great.
Yeah.
I'll just comment back, if that's okay. I really appreciate that. I think there is something about beauty and a place that's set aside, and so for us, it's obviously set aside for worship, but it is also just a place, even just to kind of gather. Sometimes just even a place to sit in quiet and peace. Often cathedrals are often open, where you can go in. Again, there's always worries about that sometimes these days, sadly. But so often cathedrals try to make sure that their doors are open and people just to come in. And so most of us maybe have traveled in other parts of the world. I think of Europe, but there's other places, of course, in the world where many will flock to the cathedrals because of the architecture and sort of often stunning, maybe stained glass windows and things like that. But I think you're right, Laura. I think there's something about finding a place that's kind of just set aside for peace and calm and comfort and beauty and all of that as architecture. I think is really important for us as a society. And I would suggest that sort of cathedrals or churches are not the only places for that, but it's important that we have that, I think, in our society. So thank you. Thanks for raising that. That's sort of that's how I would sort of respond to that as well. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Great. Hey.
There. Hi, Sarah.
Thank you, Bishop John, for your talk and for really opening my eyes to how modern the church is or how it's modernizing. It's somebody that sort of grew up in an ambivalent household about religion,
Right.
and didn't have any structure or formality in religion growing up. I'm 51 years old. I kind of feel like, am I an old dog that can't learn a new trick? So where would somebody who wants to explore religion for the first time, or
Sure.
sort of let go of some of the past beliefs or
Sure.
possibly negative experiences, where's the entrance point, or
Well,
where
that's
do we
great.
get started?
Yeah, thank you. What a great question. So I know this can probably, again, for some people might feel rather intimidating, but I would suggest contacting the local, so I'll just claim it as an Anglican church is where you would want to turn to, but of course it may not be that. But let's just say, but to contact your local priest, Anglican priest, and just see if you can just have a conversation with her or him, and I would suggest that they're going to be really open to that, because that's one of the things that we tend to love to do, is just have conversations with people, especially just someone who's interested. And even if you feel, well, these are really dumb questions, or they're going to think whatever, that I should know this or whatever, I know that they would really enjoy the conversation with someone who's just interested and maybe just wants to ask some questions. I mean, whatever it is, as simple as, what does it mean to have faith? How do we understand God in this day and age? How do we understand who Jesus was? Or I'm not, they're your questions, so you can work out what it might be. But I think you're right. I think there's an openness now that maybe there wasn't a number of years ago around that you could certainly just go and talk to a priest or a pastor or a minister, and just say, just tell me more about your church. So and obviously there's also checking things out on a website can also help a little bit. Depends, but sometimes there's really lovely descriptors of maybe what's really important for that church, and it may, if that sort of feels like that's something that you would connect with, then that would be a good church to go and just see if you can contact the priest or pastor, and just have a conversation. As I said, they're going to be really open to just having a cup of coffee and having a chat. So, because I think there are a lot of people just wondering, but they're not sure where to begin, and it can be kind of intimidating or scary, and I get that, because whatever, we're all afraid of either doing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing or offending or something, and I would just say that, in particular the Anglican Church and other churches too, and other faith groups, but are really just open to conversation. If from where you're coming from. So yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sick. Bishop, thank you so much. It's
Great to see you.
yeah, great to see you too. And I was thinking so much about what a bishop means to me as a priest in the diocese. And what I can tell you is that accountability is really important to me. And that's a weird thing to say, maybe, but I went to an ecumenical seminary in Berkeley, California, which I loved. And there's other things that I learned there, but I also learned that you need to have a foundation of accountability in order to have. There's reformation and conservation, and those two forces always have to go together. Otherwise, you get into a heap of trouble.
Yeah.
And having lived in the United States, I can tell you that wasn't fun
Right.
there. So I've been really grateful for that in any bishop, and Bishop John particularly. Every bishop is different because
Sure.
all human beings are different. So they all have their own call, their own charism, as we say. There's all these vocabulary words tonight. I learned about schmear. I never knew that. I thought that was what you put on bagels. I didn't know there's schmear. I was stoked about that now. But I think a big part of the Anglican character is, across the broad spectrum, is a
Right.
character of wonder, is
Yep.
wonder and mystery and curiosity. And just even last Sunday when I was preaching, I said, if you ever run into someone that tells you they have all the answers, run. Run away,
Go the other way.
right?
Yeah.
Because it's just not healthy. And Bishop John that's part of his charism, to be, in my observation in my short while, to be open and to be in that wonder and be willing to be creative and to change. So as a priest, I've appreciated both the Reformation and the conservation
Oh, that's great.
together. Um, Bishop, I wanted to so I want to ask a question here. You're talking about ways that things have changed, and I think, what's that saying? The more things change, the more they stay the same. But you know, um, Sarah, I don't know where you live, but you're very welcome to come have coffee with me. I like the Black Bean myself. That's my favorite place in Gibson's. But sometimes, especially even younger people who we thought, well, the stereotype would be that they would want to have, rock and roll Jesus and smoke pots and stuff. But a lot of them really care for the really ancient services and liturgies. And sometimes folks don't know about them. And I'll tell you one thing is if you ask a question in a group of the Anglicans, you're doing everybody a favor, because I tell you, there's at least a quarter, third of them that don't know the answer either.
That's right.
And so you give them permission to go. Yeah, I didn't realize that. So, in terms of what I've observed, and this is where the question is coming in, Bishop, is that
Sorry.
I observe us moving into a more missional structure and less colonizing structure. And what I love about the Anglican Church of Canada is that we're acknowledging the mistakes we've made in colonizing. And I feel like that's important. And so the word tradition now is much more inclusive, right? Whereas I'm Celtic, a European American, there are other kinds of music, other rhythms, other instruments, other ways of understanding the world that have broadened the table even more. And I guess, Bishop John, I wanted to know if you just give you that as a prompt to comment on how we're becoming perhaps more inclusive and how you see that playing out, if that's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just quick. Thanks. Thanks so much, Joyce. I do think so. It's interesting at probably when stepping in the role of bishop and just sort of being sort of seeing a little bit more of sort of worldwide Anglican Church and just sort of the breadth of that. So I was talking about that the Lambeth Conference is what I was talking about. So that was the gathering of all the bishops in England, and there you really see just this incredible depth. I mean, I sort of think of the Anglican Church and think of Church of England and sort of that background. But in reality, most Anglicans live in Africa, and most Anglicans are not white people of European descent, which is just interesting. I mean, just in terms of what we think of the church, but it's also important that breadth of who we are, and so. There is essentially an Anglican church in every country of the world, not quite, but close to that. And each location will bring some influence on the church, and I think that's really important. And also then how that can also spread further than just that country. So we're noticing in, say, the diocese here, a number of folks from the Philippines who are Anglican, and just how much influence they're having on our church, our local church, which is wonderful to see. And then also church from India and from Africa and different parts of the world. And I think it's just being embracing some of that, just a different maybe understanding of church, that there is more breadth to it than maybe we originally sort of thought of sort of Church of England, which is where our roots lie, but that we are much more than that. So I would say that's what's important, and then paying attention. Linked with that is paying attention to the world around us and hearing different people, different voices. So as I said, I was talking about science and faith earlier, and I think that's wrapped up into that, and hearing what's going on in the world of science, and where does our faith fit into that, rather than sort of slam against it. It's important to how do we understand that from a perspective of faith and a trust that there is the other, that God is. So our belief that things were made or have had a source from God, and yet things also change, evolve, and we know that the universe is billions of years old. So all of that, how does that all fit together? And I love wrestling with all of that, and questions over coffee and having discussion about that's I find that really important and life-giving. So there we are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that's our last question. And what I did appreciate, Bishop John, was that openness as well, and the idea that you come from a science background as well as a spiritual background. And what a gift you are to our diocese. Where is the cathedral, your special cathedral?
So our cathedral in the diocese is right at the corner of Georgia and Burrard in downtown Vancouver. So many folks either have gone by it or maybe even walked by it, but it's fairly prominent right opposite Hotel Vancouver, if that is helpful in terms of landmarks. But so it's wonderful to have that location. It once was, I think, the tallest building around.
Oh
there now, and it's
my!
nowhere near that anymore. Yeah,
No.
it looks like this tiny little cottage
Yes.
stuffed in the midst of these huge buildings. But it's a really lovely building. If you have never been in and interested in going in, it's open most days, and you'd be more than welcome. Just as I said, just to go in and sit or just wander around or whatever feels right for you. But it is really lovely. Yeah. Yeah.
And so the Sunshine Coast is part of your diocese, and
right.
It goes to New Westminster or beyond?
Goes beyond, from essentially Hope to Whistler, and then obviously up the Sunshine Coast up to Powell River. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, what a pleasure. Yeah, it's really great. Thank you and great questions, and thank you for your interest and all that. That was great.
It was, and there was, I wanted to echo that there's a lot of really good information on Google to find out how evolving the church is.
Right.
It really impressed me that each church can really, as long as there's a few of the structures that are important to maintain, there's a lot of flexibility. Right. That's what I got from my search, and you reiterated. So thank you.
Thank you.
So